So what really turned me around, and the Bush illusion would let you realize this, was the whole Iraq invasion and the WMD issue. And again, this is so naive to admit this, that I was so naive at the time, but when it was leading up to the invasion and Bush and his subordinates were saying how we have all this credible intelligence about Iraq's WMDs, I totally believed that, and I just thought the issue was, I said, okay, I'm going to right now use this as a litmus test to see, is the U.S. really this domineering foreign power, this imperialist power that the left says it is, or are we basically the good guys and sometimes we go too far and we overstep, but we're basically still, the freedom fighters of the world kind of thing. And so I said, okay, if it looks like to me that Saddam Hussein really does try to do what the U.S. wants and turns over his weapons, and then, we avert war, then I'll say that the U.S. is basically the good guys. Whereas if it looks like, the United States invades when Saddam did what he could to try to, turn over the weapons, let inspectors through, then I'm going to think that the U.S. are the bad guys, just like the left says. And so you can imagine, it didn't occur to me, well, wait a minute, what if there are no weapons? What happens then? What does that make the U.S. if we invade when there are no weapons in the first place? Because I thought the issue was, okay, they've got weapons, and do we invade or not? Because they might at some point use them against us. And I thought, well, no, we shouldn't, but let's see how it plays out. So, and if you, just to defend myself a little bit, it wasn't that I thought the U.S. president and his advisors were above lying. It's that I thought, well, if you took over another country based on reasons that turned out to be dead wrong, you would probably get in trouble. Like, something would happen to you, wouldn't it? Like, you wouldn't do that, surely. And it turns out, well, no, nothing would happen to you. You get reelected. That's what happens. So that was the flaw in my reasoning, is I didn't take the analysis far enough, and I just assumed that the American people surely wouldn't reelect somebody who led them into war on the basis of things that turned out to be wrong, whether you thought they were lies or not. That's the thing. What's funny too is how the conservatives spin that and say, every other agency thought that, and well, okay, but when it comes to things like when the left makes arguments about, well, every other European country has much higher taxes on gasoline, of course the right's response is, well, we don't want to be like those idiot Europeans, like if the French have more syphilis than we do too, ha ha ha, we don't want to copy them. But yet that's exactly the argument they use, and I don't know if the French do or not, I'm just all right, so, but you see what I'm saying, that sort of that's just a throw-off line, and it's stupid when the left uses arguments about comparing us to the rest of the world, but yet when we want to explain, gee, why did we just take over this country on things for reasons that turned out to be completely wrong, that's not an indictment of our intelligence agencies, that's just, well, it's not, everybody else thought that too. Right, so, in any event, that's what really turned me around the WMD thing and why I started to agree with the left, and so now it's, I can listen to NPR, whereas before I hated NPR. Terry Gross just turns my stomach, and I can't stand these people. But now it's, and it's just interesting when I'm grateful in that sense that I've lived through this, because now I can see the merits in both sides. So just like I can understand now where conservatives are coming from when they rail against the welfare policies of the left, by the same token, I totally get now when I listen to a quote-unquote liberal commentator and how they rail against the religious right and Bush's America and fascism and things like that. I see where they're coming from too. So it was sort of an educational experience. One last thing I want to point out about the similarities between the pundits defending Bush. What I noticed is with this WMD issue that they saw it coming. So at first, when we went in there and we didn't find any weapons, and Rumsfeld was saying things like, at press conferences, they'd say, where are the WMD? And he said, we know where they are. They're around Tikrit, and they're north of bases in Tikrit. We have solid evidence. Of course, they're not going to have them right on the border when we first cross into there. It's going to take a while. And they would say stuff like, look at Iraq's the size of, and they compare it to U.S. states and say, do you think you could go find weapons in 2 days in the state this size? And so they would just keep laughing at the left and these lunatics for expecting so much from the U.S. troops, and don't worry, it'll turn up. But as the months passed on, I think the right-wing pundits, they started to realize, well, wait a minute, we need to change our position, because this is, at some point we're going to have to admit there are no weapons there. And so it's just interesting how it morphed over time. And I do have it. Like I said, I don't think it's online right now, but in a series of a Lou Rockwell article, I did point out, I caught this guy, I think it was National Review Online writer. He wasn't like their regular, it was one of the guys that they had occasionally. And he had an article, I think it was Clifford May, but I'm not sure, but I think it was him. It was 1 week to the next, like literally, I think 7 days had elapsed. And he was talking about the the yellow cake, uranium, and all that issue. And it was amazing how the first week's column, it was just totally against what these liberal Democrats were talking about, and just complete, the administration's been completely exonerated on this, and just these idiot anti-war leftists are just hurting our troops' cause over there and demoralizing the troops. And then 1 week later, he toned everything down by 10% on all his points, and then opened up the door so that in the future it could just be totally, yeah, we knew all about that stuff, and no one had ever said otherwise, and so that's the way it worked. And it struck me that it was exactly similar to what the leftist pundits did during the Clinton administration when the Monica Lewinsky stuff came out. Because if you remember, right when those allegations were first made, and Clinton denied it, famously saying, I didn't have relations with that woman, the leftist pundits they were just all over the place. They were saying things like, oh, come on, you right-wing conspiracy. Clinton's a very charming man. Do you really think he would have picked that intern to have an affair with if he wanted to have an affair with? I mean, they were saying stuff like this. It was ludicrous, and it was just a right-wing conspiracy. But then as time went on and they started getting all that hard evidence, they said, okay, we're going to have to do something about this. We can't just flip one day to the next and say, yeah, he did it. So they started morphing it over time and saying things, well, these, and eventually, of course, their position was this doesn't rise to the level of an impeachable offense, and these, right-wingers are concerned about sexual immorality, whereas look at all the prime ministers in Europe and so on who have mistresses, right? Do you remember this stuff? How that's not what they said initially. They didn't say initially, well, whether he had the affair or not, it's not a big deal. No, they didn't. They denied. He said he did not have that affair because he said he didn't. You guys have no proof. This is crazy. And then once they realized, wait, he probably did, or they knew, okay, he did, we got to do something, they just slowly morphed their position, their defense of him, into what is now in the history books. And so the right-wing pundits did the exact same thing with this WMD issue, that if you went back and read what they initially said, they weren't saying things like, whether or not Saddam has WMD, we needed to invade to give Iraqis freedom and to depose Saddam Hussein, and he posed it. They didn't say that. They said, no, there's WMD, clearly. The president said it in the State of the Union, da-da-da-da. And then it was only months and months later that they realized, okay, we need to change what the rhetorical justification for the invasion was. So again, it really, this is so cliched, and people who are older and already knew this are going to think, well, why are you harping on this? But again, it was a learning experience for me that all the reasons I didn't like the left, the right does the exact same thing for their own pet projects. And it's an interesting comparison if you just go through it, that what is it that the left does? They advocate, of course, government power and money for their pet projects. They think that they're smart enough and that they have the right to take your money and spend it on projects they want to remake society. And as we know, as Austrian economists, the things that they're trying to fix, the social problems that they're trying to fix, are actually caused by previous such interventions in the first place, right? And I'm not going to bother going through it because you guys are familiar with it. But the right does the exact same thing, that it's just they care about defense issues, not social issues. And so they are extremely arrogant and naive, and they think that with the power of Washington, D.C., we can remake the Middle East. They actually think that that's going to work, and they're not afraid to go in there and try to remake it, just like the left isn't afraid to try to go in and remake an inner city. And their proposals, again, what the solution to everything is always, we'll just increase our budget. We just need to do more of the same. We didn't have enough money last time. Or so-and-so, stabbed us in the back, and that would have worked except for we didn't have the right people in charge. If only we had a different general, then it would have worked, right? That's their mentality, the same way the left thinks that, yeah, there's nothing wrong with inner-city housing projects. It's just the particular person who was in charge was corrupt, and he didn't oversee the construction properly, but we'll just get the right person in there. We'll build some more. Right, so that's their mentality. And again, the things that we're trying to fix, the fact that, wow, these people around the world hate us so much, and we're just sitting there minding our own business, and then all of a sudden Japan attacks us out of nowhere, and then okay, we got to reluctantly go over there and take over Europe and put troops over there, and then we're just minding our own business again. All of a sudden these crazy Arabs come and bomb us. Well, okay, we got to go over there and fix the Middle East, and and all these terrorists. So all these issues you can again go through and see that it's precisely because of prior interventions that are causing or at least exacerbating the things that now allegedly require a response from our military. So it's very interesting. And I like to just tell people that what's the stereotype of American politicians in terms of Republicans and Democrats? It's that the Democrats are weak on defense. They're very pacifistic, but they like to spend a lot on social programs, and they're very interventionist in terms of the domestic economy. Whereas the Republicans are supposed to be the opposite. They're big war hawks. They go around blowing people up, but they are at least good in terms of free market economics. But if you say that, okay, well, who were the presidents that were the biggest warmongers in the 20th century? You start listing them, they're all Democrats. I mean, who's the one political ruler in human history who's used nuclear weapons against innocent civilians was a Democrat. And in terms of the Republicans, Richard Nixon, what did he do? He took us off the gold standard. He imposed peacetime wage and price controls, and then he visited China, right? So it's just funny that when the stereotypes we have, they're not even right or correct, So it's just really frustrating.